I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Bryce Crocker, CEO of Jervois Global. Bryce joined Jervois in 2017 and has drawn together a high-calibre team of experts across the nickel and cobalt value chain. The team has successfully transitioned the business from a single nickel cobalt mine development in New South Wales to a global company with assets in 3 countries supplying advanced manufactured cobalt, chemical and powder products to the world's premier battery, car and industrial manufacturers. Mr. Crocker has led the vertical diversification of Jervois with the acquisition of the United States' largest cobalt resource, Latin America's only Class 1 nickel cobalt refinery and a world-leading advanced cobalt manufacturing facility in Finland. Prior to joining Jervois, Mr. Crocker was with Xstrata for over a decade and was director of the Xstrata Nickel Board and an Xstrata nominee director to the Nickel Institute Board. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bryce.
Thanks, Reg, and thank you to Diggers. Pleasure to be here today. Just skipping through the usual disclaimer. So as Reg outlined, we've assembled a portfolio of what we believe are geopolitically significant assets, particularly as it pertains to their host countries. I think one of the earlier presenters spoke around critical minerals and how it's certainly changing the investment dynamics, and unfortunately the geopolitical world that we live in is arguably getting more complicated, not more simple. So what we have is we've got Idaho cobalt operations. So Jervois has just finished construction of the only cobalt mine in the United States. We've invested $155 million. We're on the cusp of production. We suspended just before we were due to commission. We wet commissioned, didn't put ore through the mill due to low cobalt prices at the time at the end of March. The United States has no cobalt mines, hasn't had a cobalt mine for essentially generations, and cobalt matters. The Department of the Interior, they list 35 minerals arguably as critical, but when you go and sit opposite the Pentagon, there's really 2 that genuinely matter, and that's rare earths and cobalt. We've got a partnership now with the US Department of Defense. There's an initial $15 million that they've allocated to support the drilling. So even though the mine is suspended, we'll be commencing a drilling program shortly. And I guess I'm talking to an educated audience as it pertains to mining today in Kalgoorlie, and many of us have worked in the industry a long time. So this is an underground mine, and typically the risk, as we know, for these small high-grade mines is when you get underground, it's not exactly as you hope. So the bad news is the cobalt price isn't what we expected or hoped when we went to turn on the facility. The good news is underground. Grades are holding up, widths are wider than what we expected, geotech's better than what we expected, and so certainly the mine's complete. We've got 30,000 tonnes of ore that's stockpiled, ready to go, and again, we're just working with customers, working with governments, and obviously constructively optimistic on the cobalt price that Idaho will come into operations in the proximate future. San Miguel Paulista, again, so Brazil has this is the only Class 1 nickel refinery in Brazil, in Latin America, and for context, the United States also doesn't have a Class 1 nickel refinery. The only Class 1 nickel refineries in the Americas are in Canada. So this is an important strategic asset. It was closed by a prior owner, Votorantim, due to the closure of a mine within Brazil. It sits in Sao Paulo. For those of you that spend time in Brazil, it's 5 kilometres from Guarulhos International Airport, so it's in the industrial manufacturing heartland of Latin America. 40 million people. When it closed, the real was 2. The real's now just under 5. So for those of us who work in the iron ore industry or you've been in Australia, obviously you understand the context of what our country would be if the Australian dollar slipped below 50. That's essentially what's happened to Brazil. So this facility here, it's a 25,000 tonne per annum facility, 25,000 tonne nickel, 2,000 cobalt, produces a product called Tocantins. It's well known. We used to trade it in our prior lives. We supplied some material going in from a prior employer, and we also sold the majority of the material going out into the United States and Japan. It's a high purity cathode, 99.9, so above LME grade. The nickel market's quite interesting as it pertains. Everyone's talking about sulfate and batteries, but with the Norilsk being persona non grata, what that's done is it's really changed that Norilsk is obviously a quarter of the Class 1 cathode supply, It's either being sanctioned or self-sanctioned. So the nickel premium currently in the Midwest in the US are running about $1.50 a pound. So what it's done is there's been some structural changes in the nickel market that give this particular asset some strong tailwinds. Nickel premium, nickel price, as we know, is kind of above the $8 a pound that we used in the feasibility study. And also with the rise of supply from Indonesia with MHP, again, it's fundamentally changed the input into this particular facility. So we're looking to restart it, not at 25,000 tonnes, smaller, 10,000 tonnes on MHP. The restart capital is about 345 million reais, or 65 million US. So in the context of a brownfield restart for a facility that's operated for over 3 decades, we're excited by this. We've signed an initial input supply contract with Gordes, a facility, HPAL facility in Turkey, and have a number of other contracts under negotiation ready to execute as and when we reach FID. There's a partnering process that's underway for this facility here. Turning to Jervois, Finland, this is the flagship operation. We purchased for 200 million US from Freeport. So this is the part of the Kokkola cobalt refinery complex, the largest, lowest cost cobalt refinery and manufactured chemicals, powders business globally. We have 6,250 tonnes of that 15,000 tonnes capacity, and we produce advanced chemicals, powders that sell into a range of industries, including obviously the battery sector. And last but not least, Nico Young. This was the asset that we originally came into Jervois on the back of. The team within Jervois that's here at our booth, they constructed, commissioned and operated Murrin Murrin in Western Australia, including the heap leach, so the HPAL and the heap leach. So Nico Young is a heap leach opportunity. It's essentially not valued in our share price today, and so we're, given our offshore focus, we're now looking for ways to monetize that asset and running a process. Just talking around some of the points on the right-hand side with regard to strong operational focus at Jervois, Finland. We returned to EBITDA positivity in Q2, generated over $30 million of cash in Q2. I mean, the business, for context, we sold over 3,100 tonnes of cobalt in the first half of the year and just came in shy of $115 million of revenue. And Jervois, Finland is again back on its way to being an important profit and cash flow generator for the group. As I said, there's a number of capital structure and restructuring opportunities underway. We've had inbound interest on each of the assets, and so we are busy with the bankers looking at ways we can position the asset base moving forwards to sustain the growth that we're looking for. I touched around the US Department of Defence. We've also received a €12 million grant from Business Finland for an expansion of the Kokkola facility in Finland, and certainly part of the work that we're now doing with government just reinforces the geopolitically significant nature of these assets. And for context, in Finland and with regard to the car makers, I mean, we've been supplying cobalt, sulfate and PCAMs into the lithium-ion industry for over 25 years. So lithium-ion batteries haven't been around for much longer than that, and so we've been an established part of that supply chain for a very long time, and obviously well positioned to capitalise on that moving forwards. Touching quickly just on the cobalt market. So the cobalt market, the metal market's tipped up. As I said, certainly we've seen, because of that, the nature of the business and the fact that we're selling into chemicals, catalysts, ceramics businesses, powder metallurgy. We've got good insights into the market, and we're extremely constructive on cobalt moving forwards. It's not easy to substitute, and that applies across all of the uses. It's an important part of many industries, and I touched on, obviously for us, the battery industry is a key growth market, a key focus, but equally the Department of Defence is supporting us for different reasons in the United States, and certainly the nature of cobalt and the lack of substitutability, and certainly the need for Western supply is only increasing, not decreasing. And certainly we're seeing that ESG halo and the geopolitical halo coming through in the discussions that we're having now, and we expect that to continue to be accentuated in the future. Just touching on, this is a slide from our quarterly results. in terms of some of the targets which we had and how we've been tracking against these. I spoke around Jervois, Finland. I mean, there's not obviously an extremely strong quarter of over 30 US cash generation in Q2 as a result of working capital initiatives and as a result of the market picking up, as I've mentioned. Certainly the metal market in cobalt and the alloy grade aerospace is extremely strong. The Chinese market, which went through a dislocation, which really hurt us in 2022. Chinese metal prices now are above $18. The SRB is stockpiling. The officially announced tenders, I think, are 5,600 tonnes that they're moving forwards with. Certainly that's seen a tightening in the metal markets, and we're seeing that flowing through to other grades, and we've got a much more constructive outlook now moving forwards for the business in Finland. As I mentioned, ICO demobilisation, we're in a suspension phase. We've gone from 300 to 30 employees. About half of those employees are associated with the DoD programs, which we're commencing now. With regard to the DoD, in addition to the work we're doing in Idaho, we've also got a loan application in for a United States cobalt refinery with the DOE under their Advanced Vehicle Technology Manufacturing Program, or the AVTM. Associated with that, there's a feasibility study which is underway with AFRI, and again, that's fully reimbursable by the DoD, as is the drill program that I outlined with an initial cap of $15 million. I'm in DC every 4 to 6 weeks currently. EXIM, which is the US ECA, they've advised that we're eligible under both the China Transformative Export Programs, or CTIP, and the Made in America program for domestic eligibility, and so we're working through with them in terms of how they can potentially get involved with regard to a restart at Idaho. I touched on the SMP financing process and how we're looking at there, and certainly, as I said, we've got the bankers busy. We own 100% of 4 assets, and the key now is how we can optimise shareholder value moving forwards whilst returning to a trajectory of growth and be positioned for a recovery in commodity markets, particularly cobalt, as and when it comes. Just at the bottom there, we raised 50 US of capital recently, half through a convert, with the desire there to really align interests. So half of that convert went to the majority of the bondholders. We, similar to Pilbara earlier, where they also started their careers with a US $100 million Nordic bond, so did we, which I'm hoping is a parallel or a precedent in coming years that we can look back to, as we've also gone through our own challenges. So that Nordic bond, the majority of the bondholders now essentially have equity exposure via this convertible, and we did a 25 US rights to existing shareholders, strongly supported by Australian Super, who are now at approximately 25%, alongside one of the largest commodity traders in the world, Mercuria, with revenues not well known in Australia, but revenues approaching $150, $200 billion a year, US. And thanks, Reg. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Unfortunately, we're trying to play a little bit of catch-up, Bryce, so we've run out of time for questions. But again, if you do have any questions for Bryce, please go around and see him at the Jervois booth.